November 8, 2024. Downtown Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The historic Whitmore Building, a 12-story Art Deco structure erected in 1932, was undergoing its first major renovation in 4 decades. The building, once the crown jewel of Philadelphia's financial district, had fallen into disrepair after the 2008 recession forced its primary tenant, a regional bank, into bankruptcy. For 16 years, the building sat mostly vacant, its marble lobby gathering dust, its brass fixtures tarnishing, its secrets waiting. Demolition crews had been working for 3 weeks, gutting the interior to make way for luxury condominiums. The building's bones were solid, its limestone facade and steel frame still structurally sound, but everything inside needed replacement. Electrical systems from the 1970s, plumbing that predated modern codes, asbestos insulation that required specialized removal. On this particular Friday morning, the temperature in Philadelphia was 52 degrees Fahrenheit, overcast skies threatening rain that wouldn't arrive until evening. Inside the Whitmore Building's sub-basement, 3 levels below street level, the air was thick with concrete dust and the smell of old machinery oil. James Chen, a demolition specialist with 22 years of experience, was operating a hydraulic excavator in what had once been the building's mechanical room. His task was straightforward: remove the massive oil-fired boiler system that had heated the building from 1932 until 1998, when it was finally replaced with modern HVAC. The boiler itself, a behemoth of cast iron and steel weighing approximately 12 tons, had already been cut into sections and removed. Now James was excavating the concrete pad beneath it, a foundation that extended 6 feet deep to support the boiler's enormous weight. Around 10:47 a.m., James's excavator bucket struck something that produced a sound distinctly different from concrete breaking, a metallic clang, hollow, resonant. James stopped immediately, backed the excavator up, and climbed down to examine what he'd hit. Clearing away broken concrete and decades of accumulated grime, James exposed a section of steel approximately 3 feet wide. The steel was corroded but intact, and as he cleared more debris, he realized he was looking at a door. A heavy steel door set horizontally into the floor, with a circular locking mechanism in its center that looked like something from a bank vault. James called over his supervisor, Marcus Webb, who'd been coordinating work on the floor above. Marcus descended the narrow stairwell to the sub-basement, his flashlight cutting through the dusty air. When he saw what James had uncovered, he stopped mid-step. "That's not on any of the building plans," Marcus said, kneeling beside the steel door. The circular lock mechanism was approximately 18 inches in diameter, with a central wheel surrounded by what appeared to be a combination dial. The steel around it was pitted with rust, but the mechanism itself looked remarkably preserved, protected by whatever engineering had gone into its construction. Marcus pulled out his phone and photographed the door from multiple angles. Then he called the project manager, who called the building's owner, who made a decision that would unravel a mystery that had been sealed beneath Philadelphia for 58 years. "Don't open it," the owner instructed. "Call the police. If someone went to that much trouble to hide something, we need authorities present when it's opened." By 1:30 p.m., Philadelphia Police Department officers were on site. By 3 p.m., detectives from the department's major crimes unit had arrived, along with a locksmith who specialized in antique safes and vault mechanisms. By 4 p.m., a crowd of investigators, building officials, and curious construction workers had gathered in the sub-basement, watching as the locksmith examined the mysterious vault door. "This is a Mosler vault door," the locksmith, David Brennan, announced after his initial examination. manufactured sometime between 1925 and 1940 based on the design. High security mechanism, probably custom ordered. This wasn't standard building equipment. Someone had this installed specifically. David spent 90 minutes working on the lock mechanism, using specialized tools and techniques to manipulate the corroded but still functional components. At 5:43 p.m., there was a deep metallic click that echoed through the sub-basement. The lock had opened. 4 officers gripped the door's central wheel and turned. The hinges, despite decades of inactivity, moved smoothly, suggesting they'd been engineered with precision and maintained with heavy grease that had protected them from corrosion. The door swung upward, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. The vault beneath the Whitmore building was approximately 15 feet deep, 20 feet long, and 12 feet wide. The walls were reinforced concrete, 18 inches thick. The air that emerged when the door opened was stale but not foul, suggesting the space had been relatively well sealed. Detective Sarah Morrison descended the ladder first, her flashlight revealing what lay below. The vault was filled with filing cabinets, boxes, and most dramatically, stacks of cash. Bundles of currency, neatly wrapped and organized, filled metal shelves along 2 walls. But it wasn't the money that made Detective Morrison stop halfway down the ladder. It was the skeleton. In the far corner of the vault, a human skeleton sat slumped against the wall, still wearing the tattered remains of what had once been an expensive suit. The skull was tilted forward, the skeletal hands rested in the lap, and beside the body lay a leather briefcase, remarkably well preserved in the vault's dry, sealed environment. "We need forensics down here," Detective Morrison called up. "We've got human remains." Before we continue with this investigation, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and hit that notification bell. What happened in this vault involves political corruption at the highest levels, a disappearance that shocked Philadelphia in 1966, and secrets that were meant to stay buried forever. By the end, you'll understand how a powerful politician vanished, what he was hiding, and why it took 58 years to find him. The forensic team that descended into the vault over the next 6 hours documented one of the most significant discoveries in Philadelphia's criminal history. The skeleton was largely complete, held in position by the corner where it had come to rest 58 years earlier. The skull showed no obvious signs of trauma, no bullet holes, no fractures. The cause of death wasn't immediately apparent. The suit the skeleton wore had deteriorated significantly, but enough remained to identify it as high-quality tailoring from the 1960s. The fabric, where preserved, was dark blue wool. The leather shoes, though dried and cracked, were expensive Italian-made dress shoes. On the left wrist, a gold Omega watch, its crystal cracked, but the case intact. On the right hand, a gold wedding band with an inscription inside that forensic photographers documented. RH&EM, Forever, June 12, 1948. The briefcase beside the body was the key to identification. Made of high-quality leather with brass fittings that had tarnished but remained intact, the briefcase bore embossed initials on its front. RTH. Inside the briefcase, protected from deterioration by the sealed environment, investigators found documents that would identify the deceased and explain the vault's purpose. A wallet containing a driver's license issued to Robert Thomas Harrington, born March 3, 1919, with a Philadelphia address in the affluent Rittenhouse Square neighborhood. The license photo showed a distinguished-looking man in his mid-40s, with dark hair graying at the temples, strong features, and the confident expression of someone accustomed to authority. Multiple identification cards, including a United States Congress identification card, identifying Robert T. Harrington, as a representative from Pennsylvania's 5th Congressional District. The card had been issued in January 1965 and showed the same photograph as the driver's license. Business cards identifying Robert T. Harrington as a partner in Harrington & Associates, a Philadelphia law firm, and most significantly, documents that would explain why this vault existed and why Robert Harrington had died in it. Ledgers, meticulously handwritten, documenting financial transactions spanning from 1958 to 1966. The ledgers showed payments received, payments made, names, dates, amounts. They documented a systematic operation of bribery, kickbacks, and political corruption involving millions of dollars. Contracts and agreements, some bearing official government seals, showing construction projects, zoning decisions, and government contracts that had been influenced or manipulated for financial gain. Photographs showing Robert Harrington meeting with various individuals, some of whom were identified in handwritten notes as organized crime figures, corrupt officials, and business executives involved in the schemes documented in the ledgers. Letters and memos discussing the vault itself, including a 1959 letter from Robert to an unnamed associate. The insurance policy is now in place. If anything happens to me, the contents of the vault will be delivered to the Philadelphia Inquirer and the FBI. Make sure everyone understands this. The vault had been Robert Harrington's insurance policy, his leverage, his protection. He documented his own corruption and that of dozens of others, creating a cache of evidence that would destroy everyone involved if it were ever released. As long as Robert was alive and the vault remained secret, everyone was safe. But if Robert died or disappeared, the vault's contents would supposedly be revealed, ensuring mutual destruction. Except something had gone wrong. Robert Harrington had ended up dead inside his own vault, and the insurance policy had never been triggered. The secrets had remained sealed for 58 years. The discovery made immediate national headlines. A congressman found dead in a secret vault filled with evidence of massive corruption. The story had everything: political scandal, mystery, organized crime connections, and a decades-old cover-up. But who was Robert Thomas Harrington, and how did he end up dead in a vault beneath Philadelphia? Robert Thomas Harrington was born on March 3, 1919, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the son of Thomas Harrington, a successful attorney, and Margaret Harrington, a school teacher from a prominent Philadelphia family. Robert grew up in privilege, attending elite private schools where he excelled academically and socially. He was intelligent, charismatic, and ambitious, qualities that would define his entire life. Robert attended the University of Pennsylvania, graduating in 1940 with a degree in political science. He enrolled in Penn's law school, but his education was interrupted by World War II. Robert enlisted in the Army in 1942, served as an officer in Europe, and returned home in 1945 with a Bronze Star and the respect that came with military service. He completed his law degree in 1947 and joined his father's law firm, Harrington & Associates, which specialized in real estate law, contract negotiation, and municipal law. Robert proved to be an exceptional attorney, winning cases, building relationships, and establishing himself as a rising figure in Philadelphia's legal and business communities. In June 1948, Robert married Elizabeth Morgan, the daughter of a Philadelphia banking family. Their wedding at the Rittenhouse Club was attended by over 300 guests, including judges, politicians, business leaders, and society figures. Robert and Elizabeth had 3 children: Thomas, born in 1949, Margaret, born in 1951, and Catherine, born in 1954. By his early 30s, Robert had everything: a successful law practice, beautiful family, social standing, and wealth. But Robert wanted more. He wanted power. He wanted influence. He wanted to be more than a successful attorney. He wanted to shape Philadelphia's future. In 1952, at age 33, Robert ran for Philadelphia City Council. His campaign emphasized reform, modernization, and bringing Philadelphia into the post-war era of prosperity. He won easily, beginning a political career that would span 14 years and ultimately lead to his death in a sealed vault. As a city councilman from 1952 to 1960, Robert built a reputation as an effective, pragmatic politician who could get things done. He championed infrastructure projects, supported business development, and cultivated relationships with labor unions, business leaders, and political power brokers. He was charming, persuasive, and increasingly influential. But behind the public image, Robert was building something else, a network of corruption that would eventually involve dozens of officials, contractors, and organized crime figures. It started small. A contractor who wanted a city contract would make a campaign contribution to Robert's political fund. In exchange, Robert would use his influence to ensure the contractor's bid was viewed favorably. Everyone benefited. The contractor got the work, Robert got money and loyalty, and the projects got completed. By the mid-1950s, the operation had expanded significantly. Robert wasn't just facilitating contracts. He was orchestrating a systematic scheme where zoning decisions, building permits, construction contracts, and municipal purchases were all influenced by payments to Robert and his associates. The amounts involved grew from thousands to tens of thousands to eventually hundreds of thousands of dollars. Robert was meticulous in documenting everything. He kept detailed ledgers showing who paid what, when, and for what purpose. He kept copies of contracts and agreements. He collected photographs and evidence of meetings and transactions. This wasn't carelessness, it was strategy. Robert understood that in a conspiracy involving dozens of people, the person with the most complete documentation had the most power. If anyone tried to betray him or cut him out, Robert could destroy them with evidence. If anyone threatened him, Robert could threaten mutual destruction. In 1959, Robert took his insurance policy to the next level. He had the secret vault constructed beneath the Whitmore building, which was owned by an associate who owed Robert numerous favors. The vault was built during a renovation of the building's mechanical systems, disguised as foundation work for the new boiler. The Mosler vault door was installed. The space was finished with concrete walls and metal shelving, and Robert began storing his documentation there. The vault's existence was known to only a handful of people, and Robert made sure everyone involved in the corruption network understood its purpose. If anything happened to Robert, if he was arrested, killed, or disappeared, the vault's contents would be delivered to law enforcement and media. This ensured that everyone had a vested interest in keeping Robert safe and in power. In 1964, Robert ran for the United States House of Representatives, seeking to represent Pennsylvania's 5th Congressional District, which included much of central Philadelphia. His campaign was well-funded, professionally managed, and successful. Robert won with 58% of the vote, becoming Congressman Harrington in January 1965. As a congressman, Robert's influence and opportunities for corruption expanded dramatically. Federal contracts, defense spending, urban renewal programs all involved enormous sums of money, and all could be influenced by a well-positioned congressman. Robert's network expanded to include federal contractors, Washington lobbyists, and even organized crime figures who saw opportunities in Robert's position. But by 1966, Robert's carefully constructed system was beginning to crack. The FBI under Director J. Edgar Hoover was intensifying its focus on political corruption and organized crime. Several of Robert's associates had been questioned by federal agents. Rumors circulated that someone in the network was cooperating with investigators. Robert became increasingly paranoid, worried that his insurance policy might not be enough to protect him. Elizabeth, Robert's wife, later told investigators that her husband had seemed stressed and distracted during the summer of 1966. He made frequent trips to Philadelphia from Washington, often without explanation. He had intense, private phone conversations. He seemed to be preparing for something, though he wouldn't discuss it with her. On September 23, 1966, a Friday, Robert told his congressional staff he was returning to Philadelphia for the weekend to attend to personal business. He flew from Washington to Philadelphia that afternoon, arriving around 5 p.m. He called Elizabeth from the airport, telling her he had business to handle and would be home late. He told her not to wait up. That was the last time Elizabeth Harrington spoke to her husband. Robert Thomas Harrington, 47-year-old congressman, successful attorney, father of 3, vanished that night. He never came home. He never contacted his family again. He simply disappeared. September 23, 1966. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The weather that Friday evening was mild, temperature in the low 60s, clear skies, a pleasant early autumn evening. Robert Harrington, wearing a dark blue suit, white shirt, and red tie, left Philadelphia International Airport in a taxi around 5:30 p.m. The taxi driver, who was interviewed by police days later, remembered Robert because he'd been a generous tipper. The driver took Robert to the Whitmore building in downtown Philadelphia, dropping him off at the building's main entrance around 6:15 p.m. Robert paid the fare, added a $5 tip, and entered the building carrying his leather briefcase. That was the last confirmed sighting of Robert Harrington alive. When Robert didn't come home Friday night, Elizabeth wasn't immediately alarmed. Robert sometimes stayed late at his law office or met with associates for dinner and drinks. But when he hadn't returned or called by Saturday morning, Elizabeth became concerned. She called Robert's law office. No answer. She called several associates whose numbers she had. No one had seen Robert since he'd left Washington. By Saturday afternoon, Elizabeth called the Philadelphia Police Department to report her husband missing. The responding officers took the report, but didn't initially treat it as urgent. Robert was an adult, a congressman, someone who might have legitimate reasons for being out of contact for a day. They documented the information and told Elizabeth they'd investigate. By Sunday, when Robert still hadn't appeared or contacted anyone, the investigation became serious. Robert had missed a Saturday evening fundraising event he was supposed to attend. He'd missed Sunday morning church services with his family, something he rarely missed. His absence was now clearly abnormal. Philadelphia police detectives began investigating. They interviewed Elizabeth, Robert's children, his law partners, his congressional staff, his known associates. They checked hospitals and jails. They contacted police in other cities. They found nothing. Robert Harrington had vanished. The FBI became involved within days. A sitting congressman's disappearance was a federal matter, and the FBI had resources and jurisdiction that local police didn't. FBI agents interviewed everyone the police had interviewed, and many more. They examined Robert's finances, looking for signs he'd been preparing to flee. They investigated whether Robert had been having an affair, whether he'd been in financial trouble, whether he'd been threatened. What the FBI discovered was deeply troubling. Robert's finances showed irregularities, large cash deposits that didn't correspond to his congressional salary or law practice income. Several of Robert's known associates had connections to organized crime. There were suggestions that Robert had been involved in corruption, though the evidence was fragmentary and circumstantial. The FBI developed several theories about Robert's disappearance. Theory 1. Robert had been killed by organized crime figures who feared he was becoming a liability or who wanted to eliminate him before he could be arrested and potentially cooperate with authorities. Theory 2. Robert had staged his own disappearance to avoid impending arrest or exposure, fleeing to another country with money he'd hidden. Theory 3. Robert had been killed by someone within his own corruption network, perhaps someone who wanted to take over his operations, or who feared Robert would betray them. Theory 4. Robert's disappearance was unrelated to his political activities, perhaps a random crime or accident. The investigation continued for months, then years. The FBI interviewed hundreds of people. They followed leads across multiple states. They investigated organized crime figures who might have been involved. They found nothing conclusive. No body, no evidence of flight, no witnesses to whatever had happened on September 23, 1966. Elizabeth Harrington and her children lived in agonizing uncertainty. Was Robert dead? Was he being held somewhere? Had he abandoned them? The not knowing was torture. Elizabeth couldn't mourn because she had no confirmation of death. She couldn't move forward because she had no closure. In 1973, 7 years after Robert's disappearance, Elizabeth petitioned the court to have her husband declared legally dead. Pennsylvania law, like most states, required 7 years of absence before a person could be presumed dead without evidence. The court granted the petition. Robert Thomas Harrington was officially declared deceased as of September 23, 1966. But legally dead didn't mean found. Elizabeth and her children still had no answers. Where was Robert's body? How had he died? Who was responsible? The case remained officially open but inactive. Detectives retired without solving it. New investigators periodically reviewed the file when new information surfaced, but nothing ever led to answers. Robert Harrington became a footnote in Philadelphia political history. The congressman who vanished in 1966, never found, never explained. The Whitmore Building, where Robert had been dropped off on September 23, 1966, continued operating through these decades. The building's tenants changed multiple times. The bank that had been the primary tenant went bankrupt in 2008. The building sat mostly vacant for 16 years, and 3 levels below street level, in a sealed vault beneath the old boiler room, Robert Harrington sat in the corner, surrounded by the evidence he'd collected, the insurance policy that had failed to protect him. The 58 years between Robert Harrington's disappearance in September 1966 and the discovery of his remains in November 2024 saw Philadelphia transform dramatically. The city's political landscape changed. The organized crime networks that had operated in the 1960s were largely dismantled by federal prosecutions. The people who'd known Robert, who'd been involved in his corruption network, aged and died, taking their secrets with them. Elizabeth Harrington never remarried. She raised Thomas, Margaret, and Catherine through their teenage years and into adulthood, always carrying the pain of not knowing what had happened to Robert. She told her children that their father had been a good man who'd made mistakes, that whatever he'd been involved in, he'd loved his family. Elizabeth died in 2003 at age 78, 37 years after Robert's disappearance, without ever learning what had happened to him. She was buried in a Philadelphia cemetery in a plot with space reserved for Robert, though that space remained empty. Thomas Harrington, Robert's son, became a teacher, deliberately choosing a profession far removed from his father's world of law and politics. He married, had children, and built a quiet, honest life. But he never stopped wondering what had happened to his father. Margaret Harrington became a social worker, dedicating her life to helping others. She rarely discussed her father, finding the mystery too painful to revisit. Catherine Harrington moved to California in the 1980s, creating physical and emotional distance from her father's disappearance and the questions that could never be answered. The Whitmore building stood through these decades, gradually declining as tenants left and maintenance was deferred. By 2024, when the development company purchased it for renovation, the building was a shell of its former glory. But its bones were solid, and its secrets were still hidden. The vault beneath the boiler room had remained perfectly sealed since September 1966. The Mosler door, engineered with precision and protected by the concrete foundation above it, had kept the space airtight and secure. When the boiler was replaced in 1998, workers had poured a new concrete pad over the old foundation, never knowing what lay beneath. The vault had been buried under 2 layers of concrete, hidden beneath a massive boiler, in a sub-basement that few people ever accessed. On November 8, 2024, when James Chen's excavator struck the vault door, 58 years of secrets were about to be revealed. The forensic examination of Robert Harrington's remains provided crucial information about his death. The skeleton showed no signs of trauma, no bullet wounds, no fractures, no indication of violence. The cause of death wasn't immediately obvious from the bones alone. However, toxicology tests on the remaining tissue and bone marrow revealed elevated levels of carbon monoxide. Further examination of the vault's ventilation system, or rather the lack of one, provided the answer. The vault had been designed to be airtight, sealed to protect its contents from moisture and deterioration. But that same airtight design meant that once someone was inside with the door closed, oxygen would gradually be depleted and carbon dioxide would accumulate. Robert Harrington had suffocated in his own vault. The question was whether this had been an accident or murder. The answer came from examining the vault door's locking mechanism. The Mosler door was designed to be opened from inside using a simple lever mechanism, a safety feature to prevent anyone from being accidentally trapped. But forensic examination showed that the internal lever had been deliberately disabled, its connecting rod cut, making it impossible to open the door from inside. Someone had modified the vault door to turn it into a death trap. The scenario that emerged from the evidence was chilling. On September 23, 1966, Robert had gone to the Whitmore building, presumably to access his vault, perhaps to retrieve or add documents, perhaps to check on his insurance policy. Someone had been waiting for him, someone who knew about the vault, someone who'd prepared the trap. Robert had descended into the vault, and the door had been closed behind him. He'd tried to open it from inside, but the disabled mechanism wouldn't function. He'd been trapped in an airtight space with no way out. The briefcase beside Robert's body contained a small notebook with handwritten entries, the last of which was dated September 23, 1966, and read, "Door won't open. Lever broken. Can't breathe. Someone did this. Check everyone who knew about..." The entry ended mid-sentence, suggesting Robert had lost consciousness while writing. Robert had realized he'd been betrayed, that someone in his network had decided the insurance policy was more dangerous than useful, that eliminating Robert and sealing the vault permanently was the solution to their problem. The vault's contents provided a roadmap of corruption that spanned 8 years and involved dozens of people. The ledgers documented millions of dollars in bribes and kickbacks. The contracts showed systematic manipulation of government processes. The photographs and documents implicated city officials, state officials, federal contractors, organized crime figures, and business executives. Many of the people named in the documents were long dead by 2024. But some were still alive, now elderly, living quiet retirements, their past crimes forgotten by everyone except themselves. The discovery of the vault brought their past roaring back. Federal prosecutors began reviewing the documents, determining whether any crimes could still be prosecuted, despite the passage of 58 years. Statutes of limitations had expired on most offenses, but murder has no statute of limitations, and the evidence suggested Robert's death had been premeditated murder. Investigators focused on identifying who had known about the vault's existence and who had the opportunity to modify the door's locking mechanism. The list was short. Only a handful of people had known about the vault, and most were dead. But one name emerged as the most likely suspect: Vincent Castellano, who'd been Robert's closest associate in the corruption network, and who'd been the person who arranged for the vault's construction. Vincent Castellano had died in 1994 at age 72, taking his secrets to the grave. But investigators found evidence suggesting Vincent had been increasingly worried in 1966 that Robert's insurance policy was becoming a liability, that if Robert were arrested, the vault's contents would destroy everyone involved. Vincent had apparently decided that eliminating Robert and ensuring the vault remained sealed forever was the only solution. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Vincent had access to the vault. He had motive to eliminate Robert. He had connections to people who could modify the locking mechanism. And after Robert's disappearance, Vincent had taken over much of Robert's territory and operations, suggesting he'd benefited from Robert's elimination. For Robert's family, the discovery brought closure after 58 years. Thomas Harrington, Robert's son, was 75 years old when police contacted him in November 2024 to inform him his father had been found. Thomas had spent his entire adult life wondering what had happened. Now he knew. "I always hoped he was alive somewhere," Thomas told reporters. "That maybe he'd had to disappear for reasons I didn't understand. Finding out he was murdered, that he died trapped in that vault, is horrible. But at least now we know. At least now we can bury him properly." Margaret and Catherine flew to Philadelphia for the first time in years to see where their father had been found and to make arrangements for his remains. Robert Thomas Harrington's remains were released to his family in December 2024. On December 15th, 58 years and nearly 3 months after his murder, Robert was buried in the Philadelphia cemetery, where Elizabeth, his wife, who died in 2003, had been buried. Robert's grave was next to Elizabeth's, in the spot that had been reserved for him since her death. The gravestone erected for Robert acknowledged both his life and the circumstances of his death. Robert Thomas Harrington, 1919-1966. Congressman, attorney, father found after 58 years. Finally at rest. The vault beneath the Whitmore building was documented, photographed, and then filled in during the building's renovation. The space where Robert had died became part of the building's foundation, indistinguishable from the surrounding structure. The documents from the vault were preserved as historical evidence, providing future researchers with a detailed look at political corruption in 1960s Philadelphia. Several books and documentaries were produced examining Robert's life, his corruption network, and his death. So what really happened to Robert Thomas Harrington on September 23, 1966? Based on the evidence, we know he went to the Whitmore building to access his secret vault. We know someone had modified the vault door's internal mechanism to trap him inside. We know he suffocated in the airtight space, realizing as he died that he'd been betrayed. We know his body and the evidence he'd collected remained sealed in that vault for 58 years. What we cannot know with absolute certainty is who specifically modified the door mechanism and closed Robert in the vault. Vincent Castellano is the most likely suspect, but he died 30 years ago without ever being charged. Others who might have been involved are also dead. The truth died with them, but we know the broader truth. Robert Harrington built a system of corruption, documented it meticulously as insurance, and ultimately died because that insurance policy became more dangerous to his associates than useful. He was killed by the very system he'd created, trapped in the vault that was supposed to protect him. Robert's story is a reminder that corruption has consequences, that insurance policies can fail, that secrets buried beneath buildings can eventually be discovered, that even 58 years later, even with sophisticated planning and execution, even with a sealed vault that was never supposed to be opened, sometimes the truth emerges when a demolition crew removes an old boiler and finds a steel door that shouldn't exist. After 58 years, Robert Harrington came home. His family finally had answers. His grave is finally occupied. The congressman who vanished on a September night in 1966, who spent nearly 6 decades trapped in a vault beneath Philadelphia, has been found and laid to rest. The vault that was meant to protect him became his tomb. The insurance policy that was supposed to keep him safe became the reason for his murder. And the secrets he documented, meant to ensure his survival, remained buried with him until a construction worker's excavator broke through concrete that was never supposed to be disturbed. Rest in peace, Robert Thomas Harrington. Your long journey from that September night in 1966 to your proper burial in 2024 is finally complete. The vault that held you for 58 years has released you. Your family knows what happened, and you're finally where you should have been all along, next to your wife in a marked grave, with your story known.